And we are now live. I'm here with Kristen Shaughnessy. Good. So happy to see you. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, by the way.
You did.
Okay.
Very good. And it's great to see you too.
Yeah, and I really, as we were talking about off air, I really appreciate your work and your involvement. And I've obviously seen your background and appreciate your efforts in the past. And yeah, it's a pleasure being able to speak with you.
I feel the same. I feel like you're educating a whole community just about, as I was telling you, I covered a lot of court cases and spoke to a lot of lawyers, but that's not common for everybody. So I think you're giving them an insight into how the process works and how slow it can go too. People want instant answers, right? But that's not how it works.
Yeah, unfortunately, the legal system is incredibly slow. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in journalism?
Sure. I started in radio in 1990, did that for a couple of years. And I went to a small television station, and then I went to a big TV station in New York City. And I did that for 26 years. So
did you enjoy that?
I loved it. Yeah. It was a great career. There's always something new. So, and I think I got out of journalism at the right time, honestly, because it's different now. But at the time you were trying to get to the truth, and the facts mattered, right. And it wasn't opinion journalism like it is now. So,
yeah, I mean, that's kind of one thing I was going to talk to you about. So I'm obviously a lot older than you. And I remember, it may not have been accurate. I don't know if the news was accurate, 50 years ago, but it appeared to be. And there certainly was a lot less options. So it was less confusing. And, nowadays, the good part is everybody can write the news right nowadays. And the bad part is everybody can write the news.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And it's hard for people to be able to screen out the garbage and to know what is the garbage and to know which sources to trust.
And sometimes you can get fooled for a while, and then you start to see cracks, and then you realize, oh, that person is not on a truth-telling side. So
Right. Unfortunately. How did you get interest in the financial news side of things?
Well, I was always, my parents raised me to, you have to be financially independent. That was always taught to us, but it was always invest in like the sure stocks, so to speak. As we know, there's no sure stocks now, but right. So that's how I did it. I remember when I first started in radio, I was making like $5 an hour. My dad's like, no matter what, you got to figure out a way to save $2,000 to put in an IRA. And he said, you'll get a understanding of compound interest, right? Just leave it there. And then of course it accumulates to a great number and you're like, oh my gosh. So I've always been interested in investing. We used to read the stock charts when they were in the newspaper. And then this latest battle I got into because my mom died of multiple myeloma in 2018.
Oh, I'm sorry.
She passed. I was like, there has to be some company that's working on this. Like, how can this still be happening? So I started doing some research, and I found two great companies that seemed to have all the things that you would look for. And they were just penny stocks. And I'm like, well, you can't invest in penny stocks. That's all you're ever told, right? Don't invest in penny stocks. Now I sort of feel like, I mean, I understand why people say that, but I also think it's because we see what's happening in the OTC market. It's sort of like, look the other way. Don't look at what we're doing here because we're robbing you blind. And you see how hard it is for these good companies to get ahead or to even, get anywhere with these toxic lenders and counterfeit crooks.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sorry about your mother, and I'm sorry about all those. And I know Ham talks about that. And I was aware of it because I followed Sava, which is Alzheimer's. I happen to follow that, so I kind of watched it in that company. But it is so, I find it so immoral and unethical that people are allowed to impair medical research and possible cures. To me, it makes no sense. And, beyond that the people who are doing it, it might impact their families directly. I wonder, let's say you have a kid gets sick, and because you put a company out of business, you lose a kid. I can't imagine living with that.
Well, I have a friend who was paralyzed in an accident years ago. And then I found the company Rewalk, which Hannah's mentioned as well, but I was like, this is great. So I'm all excited. I tell her about it. She's excited because there hasn't been anything.
Right.
And then you watch it just get destroyed. And then what do you tell her? Because I've like built up her hopes, like, here's
Right.
something that can help you. And, it's been probably 5 years and it's
Yeah.
being shorted to death. So,
Yeah. And it just impacts, the pace of technology and progression throughout the country and the world. And again, I just don't understand why that would be permitted. Doesn't seem to make any sense to me. But,
I think you said the right word. Like, I think it's immoral. Like, I don't know how at the end of the day or the end of your life, you can feel good about yourself at all.
Yeah. I know that I saw, or I didn't see, but I heard that Neuralink, which is Musk's company, implanted the first chip in a test patient. And I think the idea at first is for, maybe quadriplegic patients, people are unable to move. That's what it's first designed for. But it'll be interesting to see how much advance, we can get. And I know the FDA let them do it. So that's good. A good first step that'll let them experiment some.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many people who need help. And I feel like the help is out there. It just can't get through the process. And then when you see people who are just trying to really put roadblocks, like right in the way, it's just like, nope, you can't do it.
Yeah, literally just trying to kill these companies.
Yeah.
And we know that, if they can bankrupt it, I mean, theoretically, if they can bankrupt it by shorting it to death, they make a huge profit, no tax, and they kind of, really, again, to me, it just sounds so immoral and unethical. And before we move on, I know this is like a great placement for this. I forgot the jokes. I did it the last time too. I can't
People
go
are
on
waiting.
with that. Yeah, I know. So, what did the judge say when the skunk walked into the courtroom?
I don't know.
Odor in the court.
Oh, that's a good one.
Okay. What's the difference between a good lawyer and a great lawyer?
I think that could get me in trouble. Go ahead.
I know. Yeah. A good lawyer knows the law. A great lawyer knows the judge.
There you go.
And what did the judge say to the dentist? Do you swear to pull the whole tooth and nothing but the tooth?
That's really bad.
Yeah, I know. Very bad. Very bad. Okay.
I have one for you. A reporter was
good.
Yeah. Good. A reporter was interviewing a 103-year-old woman and said, "What's your secret?" And she said, "No peer pressure."
Okay. That's good. That's good. That's very good. Okay. And I appreciate you bringing one with you.
I tried.
I know. That was
My
good.
kids are cringing right now, just so you know.
That's okay. They're always cringing when I'm speaking, so that's fine.
Fair.
So, you were talking, you're a journalist, obviously, and we were talking about, difficulty in being able to discern between, good content and bad content. And, you're familiar with these short and distort campaigns that we've seen, capybara with finger motion. And I see publications, I complained to, I think it was TD Ameritrade. They were publishing capybara's articles, and their defense was they don't read it. That's
not a defense.
Yeah, I know. But that's
lazy. That's lazy, right?
I know, but that's literally what their response was. And the problem is, you can and Mark Brazil is I think working against capybara.
Yeah.
So you can kind of shut them down, but they're basically kind of nothing anyway, right? It's just a site, and they can move on. So it's really difficult to discipline them. And it would be nice if you could discipline the publisher. And obviously, in this country, the First Amendment is, sacrosanct, and we protect that with all means. But it seems like in some respects, there should be some limitation for putting out data and information you don't even check. At least fact check it.
Yeah, that's completely false. I mean, in India, they had that case with the Hindenburg report, and one of the richest guys, or he may now be the richest guy again, but he lost billions in his market cap, and he went after them, and the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. They're still doing an investigation, but he fought back. But you have to have a lot of money to do that, right?
You do.
So, and there was a pharmaceutical company that had just posted, I think it's in Spain. They've been around for over 100 years, a plasma company, and they had a short and distort attack. And they just filed a suit on Friday in Manhattan. So we'll see where that goes. But
Have,
you have to, I mean, that's a lot. You're trying to run a business and you got to fight the legal battle. It's exhausting.
have you yourself ever had any conversations with any of those journalists who do that kind of work?
I mean, there were not so much the short and distort, but I mean, you're always involved with stories that might not add up, right? And then you have to kind of figure out where the truth lies. So,
well, you know that Brandon Cocodin.
I'm gonna let you say it. I don't know.
I know. I saw him interviewed, and the interviewer mispronounced his name like 4 times, and he kind of gave him the dirty look. So I was listening to him, and you know, obviously Forbes is connected to the misinformation regarding finger motion, and you know, it was interesting what he admitted to. You know, he admitted to the fact that there may be like multiple locates for one share. So. And
so application, I think, right? Isn't that what that is?
Yeah, I mean, that to me, that's fraud or counterfeiting. But he doesn't believe in counterfeiting. And I was watching the interview, and if you were going to evaluate whether he believed what he said or not, I would say he believed it. And I didn't know whether he was, you know, with all appropriate, you know, I don't like that, with all due respect, because that suggests respect is due. I would say more with all appropriate respect. When I listened to his interview, it sounded almost like a childish view of things. So he was somebody, if he was sitting on a jury, unless they had a videotape of the act that was complained of, he wouldn't be able to, in his mind, analyze it and come to a conclusion based on reasonable facts. And he's the one who's basically the lead for Forbes, is publishing it. And beyond, you know, the inaccuracy, the guy is going after a community, and you know, this is the MMTLP community, who are, you know, been beaten down. There's literally been suicides in the community, just great stress and duress, and without regard to the truth. And perhaps this is true, he's continuing to try to, I guess, communicate what he's guessing. But I wanted to get your view on that.
Well, I don't consider him a journalist because he's not interested in the facts. It was very surprising when I really got looking into all this, how there are these journalists who don't care about the truth, and that they will go out of their way to kind of antagonize, as you said, investors who are really in pain and wanting answers. And you should be able to rely on journalists to help you get those answers wherever they lie, right? I mean, whether it's the answer you want or not, but you should be able to get there. And he doesn't seem interested in the truth. And I was surprised at that graphic story they put out. When I went to look at the 2 names, it was his, and I think it was his deputy editor. So then I'm like, what deputy editor? I don't know any editor or managing editor who would approve something like that. So it was surprising to me, because Forbes has always been this publication that I really enjoyed, looked up to, read, but it now takes on, like, I look at their stories with, you know, kind of circumspect, because you don't know what you're going to get. I think some of the journalists are probably great, but you got at least one story out there, or a couple stories now, that are just not factual. And I don't know how, as a journalist, you sleep at night knowing you put that out there into the world.
Yeah, I speculated, you know, and I don't know for a fact, but I was speculating because it's owned by has foreign ownership out of Hong Kong.
Yeah, it's like Whale Media or something, right?
Yeah. And we don't really know, you know, who that is. And they're an investment company. So are they is that their business, shorting? And are they communicating that because it benefits them directly financially? I don't know. But
you wrote that letter to them. So what happened with that? Because you gave them, what, 5 days? Aren't we around 5 days?
Yeah, they have not responded. And as far as I know, they haven't written another piece either. So, you know, my view, and I was going to address it with, I was hoping you were going to ask that question. I had dual motives. So my motive number one is to shut them up. So if I could send something out and that accomplishes that, at least they'll consider it. And that's why, by the way, I'm open about it. I'm speaking publicly about it because I want to make sure they get the message. So I haven't seen it, so I don't know if they're going to drop it. But here's the problem. in California, and this kind of goes back to the First Amendment, there's something called an anti-SLAPP statute, which means basically that if you speak in the public interest, any claim you make is protected. So an individual communicating fairly about a public issue can do so without risk of retribution, which theoretically makes sense.
Right.
But
you said fairly. Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah,
right?
I know.
That's the key word there, I think. Yeah.
But there's an exemption for commercial speech, so it might apply to commercial speech. But the remedy is if you file an action and they file a SLAPP motion, what would be called, and they're successful, you're liable for their legal fees. So I'm anticipating that, and before I go forward with any particular lawsuit against them, I want to feel comfortable that I'm not going to have to come out of pocket. That's one side. Separate and apart, though, I kind of what we just spoke about. I do not know if they're involved in racketeering, if they're publishing stories to benefit their own portfolio, if they're working with other shorts, and if it's racketeering, that would be something else. Not only obviously is that criminal, but it would be a civil issue. And I don't think that would be covered by the anti-SLAPP regulations.
And to figure that out, you'd have to get I want to go back to your letter too, but you'd have to get to discovery, right? So that's a process. So for people who aren't familiar with that, explain what that entails. You send this letter. This is basically sort of, you need to stop. It's a warning. It's like a warning shot, right?
Yeah. I sent them a letter, and my intention was either get a response, and I didn't know if they were going to respond or not, or to shut them up. If they didn't shut up, I might send out a second letter just to say that, I saw this and I'm not going to warn you again. We're going to go forward if I decided, or I would just proceed. If you file a lawsuit, so unlike in Mark Brazil in New York, there's a pre-litigation discovery statute.
Right.
So if you're just trying to figure out who the identity is of a defendant, you can do it. In California, there's not. Oh. So you already have to have a case to get discovery. So that's the problem, because if I could determine the underlying facts before I filed, then I wouldn't have the concern. I know generally what the facts are, but I don't know the specific details. So I have to be careful because I don't want to end up paying a bunch of money. But in California, once you file a lawsuit, if you're a plaintiff, you have to wait 20 days and then you can start discovery. And generally the way you start discovery is you would send out questions, which are called interrogatories, and you would send out a request for documents, which is called a request for production of documents. And then you get information back and you get documents back. That usually takes a protracted period of time because you generally don't get, in any case, you don't get cooperation right away. You don't get 100% of what you want. So it might take a few months, but you need that information in order to bolster your case, sometimes to prove up your case entirely.
Or they'll do a document dump on you, right? So they have to go through 10,000 pages.
Yeah, they can do. Yeah, especially if it's the government. Like the SEC would probably give you like 100. Here's everything, 100,000 pages. Good luck. Yeah, literally. So discovery is important because that lets you get insight into the other side's defenses, claims, and it lets you also understand the weaknesses of your own case. And it obviously provides you witnesses, etc. So I'm involved obviously in arbitration with Fidelity regarding MMTLP. The problem with and this is a FINRA arbitration. The problem with the FINRA arbitration is discovery is limited. So you only get what the FINRA rules say you get, which is there's a bunch of categories of documents you exchange. So they gave me 700 pages, literally, of my account. That's literally what they gave me.
Right.
I gave them, I think, probably like 100 pages of stuff. I haven't finished because I have other stuff I'm going to give them. But separate and apart from that, you can ask for discovery, but you have to demonstrate the necessity for it. So I asked for a bunch of depositions based upon the U3 halt. I don't know if you've seen the FOIA response. Yeah, based upon the FOIA response and the interactions between FINRA and the SEC, and because I have a document that says that Fidelity itself shouldn't be selling MMTLP shares as of November 15th, 2022, and I bought after that, I figured with the standard being extraordinary circumstances, and since the U3 halt requires extraordinary circumstances, silly me thought this was a case that would fit within that context. So I filed a bunch of motions. I sought to get rid of the arbiters for many reasons. And to this point in time, they've not ignored me, but they've said no to everything, period. The director said no. The arbiters said no. Not that I'm shocked, by the way.
For people who aren't familiar with arbitration, we should say, I mean, you're a lawyer, so you probably use arbitrators a lot. But if it, say it were me who doesn't, right? FINRA has the advantage here because they probably use these arbiters all the time, right?
Yeah.
So
more than that, I said, and one of the arguments I made is because I was arguing, one, I don't like the arbiters, so I don't want them to be around. But they haven't provided any type of hearing. So they rule without hearing, and they rule without giving me a reason to rule, which I don't find very helpful or appropriate. But the basic argument I made is, listen, so I have Fidelity as my defendant. Who's in arbitration in this area in FINRA? Is it me, Richard Hoffman, who has one case, or is it Fidelity who has 1,000 cases? Right. So who provides business to the arbiters? Me or, so obviously there's a conflict.
Yeah.
They just chose to ignore it. But part of the deal is here, the way these arbitrations work. So you have.
And is it forced arbitration then? It must be, right? Like okay.
Yeah.
It's everybody who has an account probably has signed something that says forced arbitration.
Correct. Almost.
And this is the reason why forced arbitrations aren't good.
Yeah. This is the reasons why they put it in the contract.
Right.
Because they know it's for their benefit.
Yeah. They're going to use their people.
Yeah. They're going to use their people, and they know that discovery is limited and damages are usually smaller, and their inclination is they're biased towards one side. So, that's where we are. But I was going to say is one of the way these go is, so we will have a trial at some point in time, June of 2024. That's when we'll have a trial.
That will get delayed, I'm sure. Right? Yeah.
There will be a result, and somebody will seek to have that result confirmed. It will be confirmed in the federal court. So where I filed a federal lawsuit that was kicked out because of the arbitration provision, I gave it a shot.
Right.
Not surprised. To get it confirmed, we go back to that same judge. And generally they do. But what I did is, because the judge ordered us to report, give us like updated reports. So after my fifth try getting rid of the arbiters, I filed a report with the judge, so the judge can see in real time what's going on. And if I go back in a year from now, it's not going to look like I'm crying sour grapes after the fact. Here it is. Right. I've displayed it. And even if the judge, let's say the result is negative, because I don't know how the result is, even notwithstanding, I believe this is obvious there's nonsense going on.
Right.
But let's say it goes against me and the judge confirms it. I always thought it gave me an opportunity to make new law and appeal in the Ninth Circuit. That's the way I've thought all the way throughout. So I will have, if I lose, I will have an opportunity, because it will present me an opportunity to appeal to the Ninth Circuit. So for me, I have kind of like a dual. Listen, if the arbiters came out and they said, "Listen, Fidelity, you stole his money, counterfeit shares, you guys should be in jail," that's wonderful. But even if it's a negative ruling, it gives us a chance to kind of change the parameters of arbitration. And there is a case now. I know you're familiar with Alpine. Okay. And there's another case that was just argued before the Supreme Court. It was called Shaughnessy, which was SEC and Shaughnessy, which is basically trying to limit the power and authority of regulatory bodies and restrict their judicial powers. So, and that will be decided, by the way, Shaughnessy will be decided before my arbitration. And I will bring that up in the arbitration too, because I think it's going to be, I think the government's going to limit the SEC's power slightly. But
do you think they're going to let you get all the way to June, or do you think they're going to try to shut you up with an offer?
I filed it March, I think, February. No, January of 2023. They have not offered me a penny, and to the opposite extent. The only hearing we had, which was a scheduling hearing, they made clear they weren't going to offer me a penny.
Well, won't they say that until somebody says, oh, this is actually legitimate, you're going to go to trial, and then it changes all the wheels, right?
Well, I agree, but if it were me on the other side, why risk? What's the benefit of having some guy like me just taking pot shots, and perhaps something comes out, perhaps, something develops. I would have at least offered me a nickel. Call me up. We'll give you 5 cents per share, whatever, and just kind of feel me out. I was very surprised that they haven't done that, and that wasn't my purpose. That wasn't my design at all. But if I were on the other side, that's what I would do. I'd shut if especially as far as I know, there's 2 arbitrations. That's it. So, and the other arbitration, he called me up. He filed the arbitration because he saw I filed one, so he got inspired to.
Good.
But nobody else has. So if I was Fidelity and I could kind of quiet the 2, I would do that. So it makes me wonder. It makes me really wonder what their strategy is. And of course, it could all be governed by the attorneys.
Yeah, it could be, but I mean, they're probably just hoping you'll give up and go away and try to give you all these documents, hope you just give up, and then
I kind of like I'm like a year and a half in.
Yeah.
If they understood, well, they understand. I guarantee you, and I'm not going to get into detail, they know that what I'm doing is not related to a financial issue. They know that. So to me,
it's a principal issue, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to change things. Yeah.
Yeah. Not that it's, I'm patting myself on the back, but this community was really in January of 2023. It was dreadful listening to these people who had like the wind knocked out of their sails. And, there was a bunch of people who were moved and decided to act, and they decided to commit to act until it's done. So I think that the short interests weren't expecting that or used to that people would roll over because it's difficult. It's not a question. It's difficult. It takes a lot of effort. Having a community stay together, like the MMTLP community to stay together. One, it's not possible to do completely. From a sociological point of view, you have enough people. Not everybody's going to get along. People have different agendas, so it's tough to do. So the shorters probably don't expect that to be a result that people would hang in. People have hung in, and people are going to hang in, I think, until it's done.
Well, I think, I think they've realized pretty early on that there's power in numbers, right? So all of a sudden you have this thing. I just think it is awful that it's been over a year and not one politician has stepped in. I think you could make your career on this. You could say you should hold a press conference every day in your district or in Washington and say, I'm going to hold this at the same time. I'm going to tell you exactly, where we are with this. And I would even put up like a counter. We are on day 1, day 2, day 404. And every day until somebody pays attention. And I would invite all the local press, because I think that's where you would get some attention locally. And then the pressure starts to build. But a politician, if they actually wanted to do the right thing, they miss such an opportunity. Right now, You're 400 and something days in, and they can't even get the certified aggregated audited share count. It's insane.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that a politician hasn't, not that they don't even have to care. I don't even want them to care. But from a political standpoint, in an election year, if you're like a congressman and you want to like pick something, how's anybody going to argue about this? How's anybody, unless you're the short, okay. But otherwise, people are going to be sympathetic to the cause.
When I listen to like the Sunday shows or the debates, and there's not one question on financial fraud, I just think how far behind they are. And that's why I tag a lot of the media in some of my posts, because I don't want them to ever say, we didn't know. Oh no, you knew, you chose to ignore it. And at some point, this is going to implode. Something's going to happen where this is going to implode. And they cannot say they didn't know. The politicians, Congress can't say they didn't know. It's just they're choosing to look the other way. And I have such a huge problem with people who will not go where the facts lead them.
Yeah, I heard it early on, and it really resonated with me. But the movie The Matrix, the red pill and the blue pill. Unfortunately, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right. So now all of us, it's like it's so obvious, it's right in our face. But if you don't want to see it, you won't see it. And you'll see it, but you choose to protect you either want to stay comfortable, you want to protect your career, you want to get along with everybody. That's not what standing up is about. You have to be willing to like go up against whoever. But if you have the truth on your side, it's so easy to tell the truth. It's hard to remember all your lies and all your, that's hard. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like when you tell a story, if you go to court, so, I've done trials, and you can tell when a witness is making up a story, it just doesn't flow the same way. You have to think about it, as opposed to recalling it, you have to think about it. It's a little different. It's easy for the MMTLP crew to tell the story because we have the facts on our side.
You have the FOIA. That FOIA was huge. I mean,
that FOIA was interesting also just because how it came about. And, the person who provided the information, I'd love to to be able to interview that person to see if it was inadvertent or it was like a gift. Because the way I viewed it is it was a gift, that somebody just wanted to throw a bone out, and maybe that certainly was the last. That was the last thread that was going to come out. But it was really important.
But if you're the person who put that in an envelope and sent it out or emailed it or however they got it, how do you not risk your career and say, I hear this community, they need answers. Nobody's giving them answers. I'm going to tell you what I found, and we need answers. Now they're going to be, shunned by the entire Washington, D.C. Congress, but at least you can look in the mirror and you can stand up, and you would have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of retail investors standing behind you and cheering you on and supporting you.
How about all the ones without the good intentions, but who want the money?
Right.
Why not whistleblowers? Right. Where are the whistleblowers? I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, I've heard rumors of whistleblowers. So I have like a bunch of people I hear information from. I hear nothing firsthand, so it's all secondhand. But I've heard like rumors of whistleblowers. But I don't understand. If I was working at Fidelity and I could on a matter, because I think this is just a common thing. This is not just MMTLP. This is going to be a whole load of things. If you came forward and you basically pulled the curtains back and you exposed Fidelity, you're going to be super rich.
Because so if you expose them, but then they're going to look at the next broker, right? Yeah, it's just going to be a domino effect.
Yeah, yeah. So but I'm shocked that no one has stepped forward.
Standing up is hard, right? Yeah. Because you have a lot of people who don't want you to do it and might threaten your safety or whatever, but it doesn't matter because we do that podcast, the five of us. It doesn't matter like what you do in your career. Even if you have a high profile career, that doesn't matter. It's how you treat people and how you react to truth. And that's what people will remember about you. They're not going to remember that I was a reporter or anchor in New York. They're not going to remember that. They're going to remember how I treated them. Right. Or did I stand up when somebody needed to stand up? If the answer isn't yes, people have to do some soul searching.
Right. When did you learn about the MMTLP situation?
I think the day I was watching it before it halted because I was just all the chatter on social media. So I was very curious about what would happen. And that halt really surprised me.
Right.
I was like, what are they going to do? Because I know they have to settle these trades because it was going into a private company. So I was very intrigued about what would happen. And then when they halted, and then for a year, you don't give an answer, or you gave those,
Yeah.
that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
That was
FAQs.
like condescending, and they shouldn't have put anything out. I mean, it just made every investor, I think, in MMTLP madder than they were. And
well, if there's nothing, if there's nothing here, then you don't have to address it, right?
Right. Yep. So there was something there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
talk a little bit about that letter that you sent, if you will. I'm going back to Forbes a little bit, but that was one of the more entertaining lawyer letters I've read. So you probably had some fun writing that.
Yeah, I do. Again, because I'm representing myself. I'm, really, I'm a representative of the community, but I'm representing myself. So I'm taking liberties. So I might be a little bit more aggressive in my stance.
Yeah.
And I put in like in language. I wonder if they even understood what it was. I put in initials in there, SB. So I said to somebody else, and to SB, and SB standing for scumbag, and they didn't even know that. But it was for my pleasure, my listening pleasure. You send out those letters. I know it was received because I sent it out to about 15 different locations.
Right. And they all got it at the same time, right? And then they panicked a little bit.
Sometimes just they'll decide not to respond because they figure what's the benefit we get if we respond.
They probably won't respond, and then they're going to see if you'll call their bluff.
Yeah.
Right. Well, because if you file, then they're like, oh no, now maybe we should have responded.
Yeah. And like I said, if I can do it in a way that I feel comfortable that I won't get sued, I will do it. And that's one side. But if I determine, and again, this is separate from that, and I've been playing with this part, and it's not reflected in the letter, this part, if I conclude that Forbes is involved in racketeering, literally racketeering, I know I threw it out, then that's a separate deal. That's not related to just, interference with contractual relations and defamation, which are probably not recoverable because of the anti-SLAPP rules. But in terms of the racketeering, that would be different. I just haven't decided.
Again, though, like if I'm a reporter at Forbes and I went to work at Forbes because of their reputation for so many decades, and then they put this out and you start reading what the MMTLP community is saying and you do your own investigation, you've got to start asking some questions. How did that get made? And it was 6 months in the making, that graphic story.
Yeah.
A lot of money was spent on it.
Yeah.
And they're hoping nobody will ask questions because they'll probably threaten their career. Like, you ask questions, we're going to get rid of you. That's what we do. We like people who toe the line, stay in your spot, and don't question authority.
Yeah, that's the part that really troubled me, was that the 6-month timeline. Yeah. I didn't understand, why is this the most important story that you're gonna do? This is it. This is, and
how did they know it would still be a story 6 months from now? Like, how did they know it wouldn't be resolved? That's a little curious to me too.
Yeah, I didn't. I think I cited that somewhere, and that troubled me too. It showed me that they had some intention that, because they didn't know how it was going to conclude. And, and notwithstanding, Brandon Kokodin, when he wrote his first one, I think the first hit piece he wrote, my view hit piece.
Yeah.
It was at the same time that Savvy Management got nailed by the SEC. Yeah. It was the same time that Sorrento Therapeutics, in that case, the judge said there was naked shorts, and they don't reference.
Did he say there's no such thing, right?
No such thing. Yeah. No such thing. Yeah. And they never came, and they wrote, they subsequently wrote no reference to any of that.
Yeah.
So that's what led me to believe that there might be some kind of financial interest.
And the fact that you can't figure out who owns Whale Media, whatever it is.
I was trying to.
Me too.
Yeah. It didn't give me anything with any certainty, and I know they tried selling it. They tried selling it to Austin Russell, who's with Luminar,
Mhm.
And he couldn't. Something happened with his loan, and they weren't able to close. But I don't think Forbes itself really makes a lot of money at this point in time.
Yeah, magazines probably at this point now. Yeah.
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 So maybe the investment wing of the business is really where the money's made, and maybe the journalistic side is just supporting the investment side.
Which then, as a journalist, you should have all sorts of questions.
Yes. But like as you said, like especially when 50 years ago, everything. If you heard the Wall Street Journal, there was just a level of integrity, and you would give it. It would have some validity just by name. And now, I mean, I don't think there's anything I take at face value.
I agree. Well, I mean, it's also different because the media, if you look at the ownership of media now, it has certainly changed. And it's, like I know the Daily News in New York, they had walked out for one day because they were upset about management. Then you look and I saw either a 60 Minutes piece on it or whatever. I think it's the same one, but they own like 200 newspapers.
Right.
So before it used to be sort of like the person who owned it was really invested in the news and the content and the factual basis of it. And that's not the case anymore. It's, it's sort of do more with less.
Yeah. You would think, if any place that you'd want like antitrust to come down, it would be as the free speech. So maybe, I think if you own multiple, and I know in certain other, like, you can only own a certain number of TV stations. I know there's restrictions. You would think that it should be across the board, that you shouldn't be able to have a monopoly on what we,
Yeah.
or even,
or lack thereof.
Yeah, the lack of.
Yeah.
Even if you are telling the truth, you shouldn't be having a monopoly on it.
I agree.
Yeah, because it's not trustworthy and it's not appropriate, especially in a country that really cherishes the First Amendment.
Now you're also going after Alpine, right? So their next court hearing is it February 8th? Do I have the date right?
Yeah, it's February 8th, and that's the appeal hearing of the expedited expulsion of Alpine.
This has been going on for like a year and a half, right?
Actually, it's funny. I was, I'd never thought of it.
Right? What's her first name?
The
woman who keeps pushing it off. Countryman, is that her last name?
The judge, I think it is. I forgot. I think she was. She was pushing off the other. There was another. There was an issue on the confirming, I think, the underlying decision. They were pushing that off because they wanted to see what happened on the appeal. The appeal, it's funny though, it's funny what you said. It's about an expedited expulsion.
It's taken forever.
Yeah, these guys are around since 1984, and I've said this a million times, but I enjoy saying it, so I'll say it again. 1984 to 2022, 39 times where they've been individually punished, either by admission or conviction. That doesn't mean they committed 39 bad acts. That means 39 separate occasions, which means they might have done it millions of times, but just never got caught.
Right. It's sort of like when the SEC says so many orders. Well, you don't say how many trades were in those orders and how many shares were impacted. They leave that information out, which would be much more interesting to know those numbers. Yeah,
because what if you're like a injured investor? How are you supposed to go after Goldman Sachs if you don't know what they're wrong about? But the Alpine thing is so lots of misconduct. Then they ripped off people some more. And FINRA still watched. They had, and again, 36,000 violations of the cease and desist order. They finally took action on an expedited basis after 40 years. And that's what generated the appeal. The appeal is that the lower court denied the injunction to stop the expedited expulsion hearing. That's what it's about.
Florida court that did that? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Then it got transferred to DC. To DC and then up on appeal. And to get an injunction, you have to have clean hands. That's kind of one of the positions. So you can't be like a scumbag because you're not entitled to equity. That's what equity is. That's what equity we're talking about. So in law, there's there's codified regulations, and then there's kind of what's in the air and what the judge can do. So to do that, the judge requires that you act in good faith. So in this case, Alpine is asking the court to uphold or reverse the lower court's denial of the injunction, and they kind of skipped the good faith part. So I think this appellate court that's going to decide this,
Right.
and so Alpine wants the issue to be whether FINRA has authority to do what they do, and there's a bunch of constitutional arguments that have some validity to them. So I like that, but they didn't touch on that they're scumbags and the court shouldn't have granted the injunction anyway. So
I mean, you have to find some humor in the fact that Alpine and FINRA are going after each other, right?
Yes.
We all sort of appreciate that.
Yeah, we hope they both lose. But but what I hope the court does, the appellate court I hope they deny the appeal based on their bad faith conduct.
And that doesn't stop immediate expulsion then?
No.
It wouldn't be, okay.
Yeah, then let's start up. You have to start up with that, because that expulsion hearing started, they were 2 days in, it stopped. Okay. They have to go and do that, and then there's a right of appeal on that too. So yeah, I know. Yeah. But my point throughout, and this is kind of what is part of the problem with the regulatory system also, they could have got rid of Alpine. They could have gone in the federal court. They could have showed evidence that they're stealing money. They could have got a receiver in there and gotten it taken care of. No question in my mind that happened. But to do that, they would have to defer to the federal court. And because they're now in a bunch of litigation where their power is being threatened, they've elected not to take that course of conduct. So it's to protect their own power base as opposed to protecting the public that they're supposed to. So I find that infuriating, and Alpine is like the poster child for the company that should not be in business.
And the fact that they just found a way around all the regulators, right? And as you said, if they had just shut them down from the beginning when they had the chance, but instead they gave them a little bit of breathing room and they used it, and now they're going after them. So they're like,
And in the meantime, it typically happens, and I've seen attorneys that do this. They'll move whatever assets they have. They'll protect their assets. They'll take them offshore. In fact, I think John Hurry, who's a character that's involved, they have a offshore brokerage basically, and they would run all their foreign trades offshore, so they'd never make them back to the States. Alpine would run their trades through the Grand Cayman Islands. They'd never make it back, and our regulators do nothing. So,
well, the fact that once they go offshore, the counter for shorts goes to zero.
Yes,
explain. There's no way to explain that. It's silly, but every trade has to be settled, right? So eventually, but I just feel like every regulator is just and every politician is kicking the can down the road instead of seizing on the opportunity to make this an issue and using it for whatever. I don't care how they use it to bolster their own career, but do the right thing. They don't want it to implode on their watch. Yeah.
Do you have an opinion whether they're paid off or if they just have other interests that are more compelling?
My feeling about politicians, just because when I was in radio, I covered them at the local level in my first television job. And I think a lot of politicians start out for the right reasons. They'll start out in like local town councils or city councils, and they really want to get stuff done. And then I think they get corrupted by the process. Not all of them, but a lot of them, because you can't really get anything done unless you play the game. And the game isn't always what the game should be. And so I think that's what happens. And you have to be someone, politics aside, just like a Liz Cheney who says, I'm standing up for what I believe is right, whether it costs me my career. You just rarely see any politician do that.
Yeah, I was always bothered, still am bothered. Fundraising seems to be the key word. And, so if you're running for election, you raise money for your campaign, you don't spend it, you get to keep it. I don't understand it. Yeah. I mean, if you raise money for a particular purpose.
But guess who has to change the rules?
Yes, I know.
People
Yeah,
are benefiting from the rules. That's why you don't have term limits. That's why, like, all the things that seem so obvious and necessary, the people who are impacted are the ones who have to vote.
yeah. Just
So,
like the trading that goes on by Congress and senators, surprising trading that's often very successful. Yeah, the fact that they can trade, period, or their family can trade without being it can be a blind trust. I'm okay with it being a blind trust, but I mean a blind trust. That means there's no contact, and I'd prefer if it's nothing.
right.
But yeah, but
well, because it's supposed to be public service, right? So you're supposed to do this for a little while for your country and get out. You're not supposed to be a career politician, but look how many career politicians we have. And you're certainly not supposed to get rich doing this, which now they go in and they might not even have a lot of money and they go out and they're multimillionaires. I mean, it makes no sense.
Yeah, I'm almost of the opinion that I don't mind paying CEO salaries to these people, but with the caveat that if I find you taking money from anybody, you're going away for 20 years.
Well, I like that.
Yeah. And so I'm okay though getting really professional people, but not corrupt, and pay you, and that's your job. But I agree, the way it's set up now, it just invites corruption at all levels, and unfortunately it makes the system ineffective. That's why, in my opinion, I look around the world, I think all governments suck. I think all governments do an ineffective job. Just relative, it's all relative on the hierarchy, and it shouldn't be that way.
It's like they only act if there's a crisis, right? Like if it's going to come down and reflect badly on them, it's like all of a sudden we see urgency.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately our country is that way in large part, that we react. We're not proactive at all. We react to whatever the crisis is of the day, and it makes it very stressful when that time comes. Maybe we'd have less stress if we kind of pre-planned, but
and there's a lot of people who would probably be very good politicians who won't even consider it, just because it does not have the air that it used to have, right? It's just it's hard to get anything done in there. So and I can't tell you how many politicians they voted yes on a bill or whatever. I'm like, did you read the bill? No.
Well,
how do you know what you voted on? Like, it's crazy.
I don't think it's possible to read some of those bills.
Well, that's true. They're hundreds of pages long.
Yeah. And, so it's interesting when, I see them, like, they'll introduce a bill and they vote on it the next day, and there's no way possible that anybody could have possibly read it, let alone understood it.
Or they finished it at midnight and then their vote is 4 o'clock in the morning and it's 400 pages long. It's like,
right.
You don't even know what you voted on.
I saw you wrote a bunch of stuff about other countries taking actions on naked shorting. Why don't you tell us a little about that?
So I started saying, like, is anybody else doing anything? And so I started looking at South Korea, because they temporarily banned short selling. I think that was in November. And that was interesting to me, because I was like, they got into trouble. So they had to do something, right, to restore investors' trust. And then people had said it was political. There were hit pieces about it, like, you shouldn't do this. Turns out it's not been a bad thing. Then they just fined the 2 banks that they found. There's an investigation into like 8 others. We haven't heard. I feel like somebody probably got to them or something. Like, I'm waiting to hear. Like, I keep checking, but I don't hear anything. Thailand's also acting a little bit. Australia, Malaysia, and Nigeria I put up yesterday. I'm like, and here we wait for the United States. Right. And in Australia, they had a guy he was basically running a Ponzi scheme, and he didn't show up for sentencing. That's the first time I heard of him. And then they found him. He had committed suicide in a hotel room because he was probably going to go away for a number of years. So
that's pretty suspicious when you commit suicide.
Yeah.
My concern about South Korea was that I'd heard that regulators from the United States were going over there to assist. And when I heard that, I thought, uh-oh, we're in trouble. I don't know. Just kind of like,
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, like, with China too, with the real estate crisis, and then you look at the U.S. exposure, that banks and hedge funds have. That's all concerning too, because then you have Evergrande was liquidated. Right. Country Garden is like the second biggest developer, maybe not the biggest developer, and they defaulted already, and they're trying to sell off all their property so that they're offshore assets or whatever to try to get money. But that could go under too. So then if you have US exposure there, but what about like just whoever in Idaho who has a pension, but they've invested in that, they don't even realize they're at risk. And all of a sudden watch their portfolio, get crushed. And nobody's even aware that it's happening. So that's again why politicians need to speak up and make it a platform.
Yeah, you're right. The ramifications are unknown until they happen. And obviously the banks, at least there's some banks that are precarious, and we don't know about how precarious they are until it's too late.
Well, there was one today. Did you see that one?
Which one?
I don't have the name of it, but it was another banking story that is not good. And they had helped with the bailout of the bank last year. I mean, it's a mess. It's a mess.
I have a funny story. Well, it was funny for me. When Silicon Valley Bank went out of business, I was in Las Vegas with a friend. It was during the basketball tournament, and we were sitting at breakfast. He's a broker. So Silicon Valley Bank had dropped, let's say 50%.
Right.
And he said, I like it now. I like it at this price. And by the time we left breakfast, he had lost like $250,000. Wow. That was half of the money he had invested just during that period of time. And obviously regulators were within very close proximity of that location. How many other institutions are there like that?
Yeah.
And what kind of stress is required to, demonstrate that they're in a precarious position? Yeah. I agree with you that, there's all kinds of problems. And, part of it is because if you're a politician, you probably think if I come up forward, I'm probably going to lose because people are going to think that I'm, a naysayer and negative. But on the flip side, if you come forward with the truth, somewhere down the road, it's going to come back and reward you also. And,
I mean, just for the fact that you could say I did the right thing, right? History is going to look favorably on you, and it's not going to look favorably on any of these people, I don't think, because I feel like our economy is just propped up at this moment, and we are in for a huge fall when you look at like the number of layoffs. Like you're hearing one thing in the mainstream media, and then what you're seeing and reading about, if you keep looking at the different sectors, it's not good.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's been that way. I bet you for about the past year.
Yeah, at least
it's felt they call it when you're looking at a stock chart, it's like a divergence. So one thing says one thing, but something else says a different thing. It sure feels like a recession, and it's felt like a recession for about a year.
Yeah, we're just going to keep telling you it's great.
Yeah.
So everything in your life tells you it doesn't feel that good, right?
Yeah.
So.
And you could obviously continue to pump money.
Right.
You can pump money, but then you're gonna
print money.
Yeah, you're gonna suffer from inflation at some point in time also. So I remember
hearing an interview a couple of years ago. I remember I was working out, and all of a sudden I hear it was the first time they said inflation is transitory, and I was like, no, you didn't just say that. Like you did not just say that. And that phrase has gone through my head so many times. And look at us, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing transitory about it. So
yeah. Well, I guess transitory if it means it's not forever.
True.
Okay.
I don't think that's what they meant.
Okay. I don't think that's what they meant also. I think that's probably a tough job though, being the head of the Fed.
Yeah.
I don't know if Powell's done a good job or a bad job. But
don't say it's transitory when you knew.
Yeah,
I mean, at the time I knew, and what do I know? But I knew it wasn't transitory. So.
But what I think is interesting, and I wonder how much pressure the White House can exert on the Fed in an election year.
A lot, I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm sure they will try.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it affects tactics that's used by the Fed, and that certainly may not be for the benefit of us. Mm-hmm. My view is, maybe they pump some money in to keep the economy. And by the way, I'm in California, so I'm a blue state. That they pump money into the economy to, because it looks better and it's better for election time. And then, like February of 2025,
it goes downhill.
Yeah, it's all, and whoever's there is kind of stuck with the mess.
Right. And then they blame the previous administration.
Yes.
And start campaigning for their own reelection.
Yes.
I mean, it's just vicious cycle.
Yeah, that's a typical cycle.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't. I hope the economy doesn't crash. But historically speaking, the stock market will crash.
Yeah.
Yes, we don't know what the event will be, and
well,
we don't.
You're hitting all these highs, and it's like we know what's actually happening, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think hats off to Ham and William for educating so many people over these last couple of years. They used to be able to say retail investors were uneducated, right? And they didn't know. And then you had what happened to MMTLP. They educated themselves too. And you have Ham I think he's smart in that he repeats the same thing over and over again until people understand it.
Yeah.
And then they tell 5 people, and it's like that. What was that?
Yeah, and then they tell 5. And,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think it was Prel or
I think it was, yeah.
Commercial. Yeah.
So I think that was from like the 80s or 70s,
Yes,
right? Which
yes.
we're dating ourselves, but it's okay.
Yeah, I'm back in the 1850s, so we're not quite back there. Yeah, those guys have been really helpful.
Very.
And you're right. It requires, one, it's complicated. Like the MMTLP story, that's a messy story. And I remember when I was a little kid, they would talk about language, and to learn as a kid, to learn language, you got to hear a word like 60 times.
Yeah.
So and for Ham, I listen to the same things too. He comes on, somebody asks the same question. Right. He repeats the same answer, but people are, very patient, but people have to hear it to really understand it.
And they also have to be reassured, right? Because it's like, okay, I think I get it, but it's still happening. Nothing's changed. I mean, and as he and William said, we can't change like what's happening. We can't stop the criminals, right? So all we can do is tell you what's going on, educate you what's happening, help you learn. And I mean, I think it's been very helpful because even I think someone like both of them, it's important in this fight because, and you with the letters you write, and you don't back down. So if somebody comes after you, a lot of people be like the shrinking violet and just, and get small. Instead, they're just like, bring it. I don't care what you say. I'm telling the truth. If I'm telling the truth, I don't have anything to hide. So.
Yeah. But as a retail investor, the fact that there's that much nonsense that goes on in the marketplace, and I had no idea it was that blatant.
I know.
And prevalent. It's really
it's disgusting, and it's so infuriating, isn't it?
It is, because it's right in your face. It's not even like we're not even trying to hide it anymore. And but we know nobody's going to, they believe we know nobody's going to do anything. But my belief is, again, the change is that it's like a boulder running downhill, collecting more dirt. More people are knowing the sunlight is exposing what's going on, and just harder to do things when you're exposed. And eventually there'll be the ramification. And like Ham and Williams said, and kind of like my view is, when a security is going to run, you never know. Yeah. And I believe it kind of will run probably in the time period that you're not expecting it to run, because that's the most likely time to run, because nobody's fighting it at that point in time. Yeah. But when you're the investor and you've lost, most of your money,
and you've invested in companies you believe in, right? Yeah. Like you think, but it's interesting. When I first started, like when I was starting to invest when I was younger, I had subscribed to these things, and now I realize they were paid for by hedge funds, and like got me into NVIDIA very early, got me into Tesla very early, right? And I'm like, how did they know? And now I know how they knew. Like we're gonna prop them up, for a while, and then we'll short them too. But
we're gonna make money, and you can, if you want to come along for the ride, and then fine. But
they're not geniuses. They're working together.
They can pay to make the stock rise, and they can manipulate people. And pre-social media, internet, there was no way to communicate that in a mass way amongst investors.
Ham will say, like when he did this 24 years ago, it was like 300 people, right? And Mark Falk and Christina, when they did the first Wall Street conspiracy, social media wasn't really, it was in its infancy, really. So people weren't using it to educate and to communicate, which is really where I think most people get their news from now, is like, it's not newspapers, it's media, social media, it's news. You got to know who to YouTube. You got to know who to listen to.
Right.
But because that can be dangerous, but if you find some good journalists who you appreciate, then, and trust, then.
Yeah, I always do this. I try to make this a practice that if I'm looking at something I'm not familiar with the writer, I then do a check on the writer before I make a conclusion about the article.
Yeah.
And that's just because, again, I don't think, you could talk about, I call it legacy media, the old media. I just don't think anybody can be trusted at a face value
I don't trust anything anymore. I really don't. Like, after my experiences in the last 5 years, I'm like, I really just think everybody's lying to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and that's not being a conspiracy nut or
it's not.
whatever. I think it's just being realistic, and you don't have to be mean-spirited about it. And you can be convinced. It's not like you can't be convinced that somebody's being truthful, but it kind of seems that's the way of the world, unfortunately. I grew up in the days of Walter Cronkite. Walter Cronkite would go on TV. He would speak. I believe, by the way, he was telling what he believed.
I think so too. Yeah. Yeah.
And you accepted it at face value. It made life a lot easier. It may not.
Well, there wasn't all the pandering too that you had now, right? So, I mean, social media is to blame for some of that, but people say, where are you politically? I'm like, I'm politically homeless. Like, I don't trust either side, honestly. I just don't. Like, there's certain people on both sides that I would maybe give more weight to than others. But if someone's full-fledged into one side, I'm like, you gotta be careful, right?
I'm with you. I'm not even willing to say I'm in the independent party.
No, I'm not either. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm just
homeless. Go with that term. It's
good. I'm just kind of like wherever it takes me. Yeah. And again, I'm skeptical of everybody in that area. So we're along the same lines. I appreciate and thank you for giving me all your time. I appreciate it. Is there anything else that you want to address that we haven't talked about?
What's next for you? Like, where are you going with your?
Oh, good question. Yeah. I was working on a motion to compel, which is, so I told you that I submitted a bunch of discovery to Fidelity, and they've basically blown me off. And I'm filing 2 motions to request them to provide me documents and answers to interrogatories. And in FINRA, in the interrogatories, although they're discouraged for finding out like the names of people and
I want to stop you for a minute, because people probably, I mean, I know what they are and you know what they are, but people probably don't know what interrogatories are. But they're these, you could write a paragraph for each answer. They can take you a while to fill these out, and it's a good way to glean a lot of information. Yeah,
I might ask a question, and thank you, by the way. I appreciate that. You might ask a question like, tell me how you ended up entering into this contract, and you would give me a description. Or, like I asked, please tell me the name of the person at Fidelity that dealt with the SEC December 4th of 2022, like that, which would only require a name. So in FINRA's system, although interrogatories, those questions are disfavored, if they are done for identifying names, etc., they're not. So that's what I'm trying to obtain, because then I could subpoena that person or seek to have them subpoenaed. And I might be able to seek to subpoena. I also, by the way, the people at FINRA, like Sam Draddy and Patricia Casamates, if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, I tried to subpoena them. So those were people. But that's what the arbiters in their kind authority chose. But I can also try to subpoena them for the trial, which is separate from discovery.
Yeah.
Well, I'm definitely going to try it anyway.
Right.
We'll see if the panel allows it. If they don't, it's more along the lines I'm thinking it's kind of a contrived arbitration. And if they do, then I get a chance to question those people.
How many are on the panel that decide?
3. Okay. 3, but there's one who's the head of the panel.
Okay.
He's not a young gentleman. He might be close to 80. And he's a lawyer. But I don't think he likes me at this point in time. But
I could see probably why you're probably nudging away, and they don't like
that. As nice as I am, he doesn't like me. Whatever. I have motions to compel. The other side will file oppositions. I will then file a reply, and then I'll ask for a hearing. They'll not give me a hearing, and they'll issue a decision. Perhaps they'll grant me some of what I'm asking and not others. I was kind of surprised, by the way, that they didn't grant me like one deposition. Pick somebody just so they could say they were being fair. Whatever. I would have done, if I were in their position, that's what I would have done. I would have picked one or two
irrelevant people.
Or somebody, let Fidelity pick somebody that's familiar with this, designate them, and whoever is going to be representative at the trial anyway, and let them do it. But I was surprised because that's usually what a crafty judge would do. They could basically, there'd be nothing you could do about it because they gave you partial relief and you were done. But they elected to be like all or nothing.
So they won't allow depositions before him, but they will at trial?
Well, it wouldn't be a deposition. It would be testimony at trial.
Okay.
But you asked very good questions.
Yeah.
So we had one scheduling conference. In the scheduling conference, we had to schedule how much time we needed for the trial. I had these motions for depositions on calendar. I told these guys, listen, if I can depose these guys, then the amount of time I need for trial is much less because I'll know whatever. But if you're going to force me to basically depose these guys while they're on the stand, I don't know how long this is going to take. So we haven't gotten back to the scheduling, but I laid it out and they've denied the depositions. But you're right. In essence, I would take their deposition
first and then just would know where to center in.
If
the judge is upset that you're taking all this time.
Yes.
Right? That's the way to lessen the time that you're going to
And they it's a relatively small security. I'm sure Fidelity probably is not happy. I'm sure. My guess is Fidelity's probably paid somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 in legal fees.
Yeah.
And
we
haven't done anything yet.
I know.
Yeah. And again, that's what surprises me. Because if I were them, and again, that's why I wonder if lawyers are kind of maneuvering this. Because if I were the lawyers,
on and on, are you kidding me?
If I was the lawyers for Fidelity, I'd say call up Hoffman, find out some measly fee that he'll take, give him a confidentiality agreement, tell him to sign it, and he can't talk about it, and we're done. Because we don't have to spend $30,000 a month on defending this. That's what I would have expected. But but as to the arbitration, I'm just going to continue pressing.
Right.
And
it sounds like they're just trying to wear you down so that you'll give up and go away.
Yeah, but I would think by this point in time
they would know.
It's obvious. I mean, now I'm going to give up after this.
Right.
I can't. I really can't. I don't have a choice at this point in time. But we'll push forward with that discovery. I'm looking for witnesses. I have some witnesses, like John Berta is agreed to testify. Yeah. I'm going to find somebody I have a couple people in mind, some technical people to testify, myself, and maybe, some other people, but I think we can lay out a pretty factually persuasive case.
Can you bring in somebody from Congress? Can you subpoena them and say,
I could
haven't you done anything?
Yeah, I could try. I mean, they're aware of it, by the way, because I've attached the congressional letter, so it's in there. I'll call up Ralph Norman, and if he's still congressman at the time, I'll call him up, and maybe he'll come and testify. I have somebody else who can testify.
That would get some media attention.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, although it's confidential.
Yeah, but you know what? You can go outside the doors and tell everything.
I can, and also
you can be buttoned up inside, and then you walk out the doors and you say, "This is what happened inside."
And the order itself is not
right.
So once the order is out, and then
somebody can shoot him coming and going, right?
Yeah, and then somebody has to get the order confirmed, and once that's in public, that's in the public domain. Partly one of the reasons why the report was filed in federal court, because now it's in the public domain also. So that's what I'm trying there with Forbes. I'm just going to see how it goes, make a decision about. I'm going to see if they continue. I'll certainly file something. just haven't decided what I'm going to file. And I told Brandon, because he's on the witness list.
You want to depose him.
Yeah. And you know why I wanted to depose him?
Yeah.
I wanted to depose him because I'd be interested, because his article is attached to the answer that Fidelity filed. So in a
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a lawsuit, normally,
right.
Not even a question, I would be able to depose him because it's part of their defense,
right.
Which is one of the arguments I raised, which I think is a problem for them, but whatever. But I sought his deposition. He communicated with me on Twitter and he declined. And I'm very, very shocked. And when I saw his interview that I saw recently, I understood why he may have declined. Because, and I understand it's not easy and whatever, but if you take a position, you should be able to justify your position. And if you can't, then maybe you should have second thoughts about it. But I think
it's really easy to remember.
Yeah, it is. But I think, besides, me and whatever I'm doing, so those two being Fidelity and Forbes, Mark Basile is, pushing, and I hope and I think and I've said this, he filed 2 petitions. And this is my view. I'm not a New York lawyer, so I don't know anything. The first petition I thought I would have denied because I thought it was seeking information as opposed to the identities.
Okay.
In my mind.
So the one that got denied, you mean?
Yes.
You agreed with
the one that got denied.
Okay. You weren't surprised.
I thought before he filed it, but when it was pending, I didn't think it was, and this is my view.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was the right purpose of the statute. Statute was specific. It's only really for finding out if you can't figure out who the defendants are. The second one was and so there was 105 brokers, really.
Right.
You know who they all are.
But
okay. The second one was an incident that happened in 2021 that no one has been able to figure out any information. There was only 2 parties involved. So literally, it was just finding out who the names of those hedge funds were. And I thought, in my mind, that's much more suited for the statute. So I thought he'd lose the first. I think there's a good chance he's going to win the second. Okay. And I thought if he wins the second, that would disclose the names of...
second, for everybody who's wondering, is...
Yeah, so the second would be the October 2021 when they decided to trade MMTLP, and there were 2 hedge funds or market makers that were involved in.
Who were they?
We think they're Ari Rubenstein and Canaccord, but we don't have that officially.
And if he got that, then he would have the information he needs to do.
Right.
And then it's just you can build on that.
Yeah, and I was going to say, then what you do is you work from there forward. And then you're going to nail all the institutions and the shorts. So I thought if he's successful on that,
that's big.
That could be a major hit.
Yeah.
And I thought, and again, I'm not a New York lawyer, but I thought that one made me feel like it was really more suited for the statute.
And not to go into another stock, I know you want to wrap up, but NWBO, they're making some progress too in their lawsuit against makers.
Yeah, so I think
interesting.
Yeah, Wes Christian represents them, and typically in those lawsuits, what happens is they are filed. Right. He's got to overcome some kind of motion to dismiss, and I remember because I looked at one.
Yeah.
He does spoofing cases mostly, and in the spoofing cases, sometimes. Because I saw this specifically referenced, sometimes the damages can be difficult to prove. And
in this one, for people who aren't, I'll just give a little background. NWBO is it's Northwest Biotherapeutics, and they had a brain cancer treatment that did very well in phase 3 trials. And when they were presenting in New York at, I think, the Academy of Sciences or whatever it was, before they started, the stock was like $2 and something. During and after, it went down to like 30-something cents. Well, they were making good news. So they have, you're saying like they have evidence, right? Like there's something there.
Right. Is that glioblastoma?
It's for glioblastoma, which is the most aggressive and common form of brain cancer, and there's people who could benefit from it.
Yeah, I have someone who I play poker with on Monday nights, and he passed away like 6 months ago from that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's a form of brain cancer that I think you have. There's no treatment for it currently,
right.
And you have maybe a 2-year life.
I think it's most is 5. I mean, it's very short, right? Like it was 6 to 9 months. This extended it by a couple of years, I think, or 10, maybe up to 10 years. I mean, it's a huge advancement. And
so where he is in the case is he's facing a motion to dismiss, and he has to survive that, which again, I think is an issue of being able to prove specific. And again, this is his stuff, not mine.
Yeah.
But there's specific technical requirements that he has to make in his complaint. And there have been some cases, spoofing cases that he's handled, where he wasn't able to do that. And as a result, the cases weren't able to go forward. I think, for example, GTII was a case like that. So I'm not familiar with this case, whether they have
they just had a court date this week, and I wish I had his handle, but it's Hoffman. He's following it, and he writes out real detailed, ironically, but he writes out real detailed court information about it. And he was saying, I think he expects it hopefully within 4 months, the decision by the judge. And that's huge. If you get that decision, then you know, they tried to get it dismissed, right? I think the judge was like, nope, not so fast. Then they tried to like pile on all these additional things. And I think the judge seems at least like listening. So that's good.
Yeah. So the judge will take it under submission. So, the hearing will happen. The judge will go back, and whenever either they have a clerk or they don't, or when they have time, then they'll work up some kind of decision. It can take quite some time. We were talking when we started about Elon Musk. So Elon Musk yesterday, he lost a case in Delaware where his pay package from 2018
$55 billion.
55 billion, which is a nice chunk of change for even me, was rescinded, not voided, not canceled, but rescinded. And this judge, the case was over in April of 2023, and the decision was rendered January of 2024. So it can take quite some time. But as to Wes's particular case in Northwest Bio, I think, and again, I'm not speaking for him, so this is my interpretation.
Right.
But I think in his practice, if he can withstand a motion to dismiss, then his cases have settlement value, and then they'll try to work a resolution.
And for people who aren't interested, like who aren't familiar again with the court, if you get that a judge rules in your favor and won't dismiss the case, that is a huge day, right? Because that judge is saying this case is valid. You have to go to trial or settle, right?
Yeah,
that's all the options at that point.
And you're able to get discovery,
right?
So
huge.
Whatever, which in the grand scheme of things, that might be the major point,
right?
So these guys believe that once if you prevail on the motion to dismiss, then there's settlement value and the cases will be resolved. The flip side of that is, so there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of that. The flip side is that usually those settlements are confidential, and maybe, it's great, but maybe has some limitations in terms of how great it is.
And I feel like they would probably the defendants would try to push for settlement before you even got to discover in that case.
Yeah. I think if the motion
they don't want to hand anything over, right?
Yeah, no, nothing. I think if West prevails, then they send out an email, let's speak, and then they're in negotiations, because I don't think they want to disclose anything.
Pretty quickly from there,
I mean, the worst for them, the worst of both worlds would be they have to pay out money and give discovery, because that would be like just setting up the next one down the road.
Always nice when you get both, though.
Yeah. But that's one of those ones you were talking about, the immorality of shorting a company like that.
Yeah.
Where again, these shorts have families. Yeah. They might have children, and their children might get sick, but they're not able to even protect their own families.
I feel like it's a disconnect, right? It has to be. Like, I don't know how you don't comprehend. It's just greed. It's power and greed.
Yeah, I think it's a sickness. If you're not able to discern that, then you're so out of whack.
You don't know what's important in life, right?
Yeah, if you're not
your
willing
health first, right? Because you can't do anything without your health.
Yeah.
And then it's finding a way to be happy in life, and it should not involve a gazillion dollars.
Yeah, my parents were Holocaust survivors, so
Wow. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so every, and that's probably why I'm kind of,
Yeah.
my view is that way a
Makes
little
sense.
bit.
Yeah.
But every sentence when they would refer to like a forward event, in Yiddish they would speak, they would say, "If we're healthy, then we will like go to Lake Arrowhead or something like that." So they recognize, and most people as they get older recognize that without health you got nothing, right? But
Right.
these guys, they don't even recognize that, and even in their own families don't recognize it, and it really is disgusting and appalling.
And it's not just their own families. I mean, they're basically forcing other people to either be very sick, not get well, or die.
Yeah.
They're making health decisions for people by shorting the hell out of these stocks.
Yeah, and yeah, and there's no other way to look at it.
Right. You're not allowing cures or research to come to what it could be. So, and it's all greed and power. That's all it is.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, it's disgusting.
It is.
You started off that way. That's
We'll
what
end that way too, right?
Yeah, I say it. I say it too. Okay. Anything else you'd like to mention?
No, this was fun though. We can do it again.
Your handle, your Twitter handle?
Oh, it's K Shaughnessy 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to plug?
No, we have a podcast, the five of us. It's all work related issues that we discuss. So
Okay.
with all the layoffs, we're actually doing our next one on whether to take a buyout or like don't sign anything if you get laid off right away. Do not sign anything.
And how would they find that podcast if they were looking for it?
We're on Spotify, Amazon, Apple. So
Okay.
yeah.
And I'd look forward to maybe in the future when we get some new action, we can talk again.
That sounds great. Keep us updated on Twitter about your court things.
I will do. I will obviously. Great. Enjoyed having you on again. Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it too. Thanks so much.
And look forward to having you again. And be well as I end this.